This holiday season, we all wish for hope and healing. Children and families who spend their holidays at the hospital deserve a reason to believe in first steps, in giggles, high fives, and hugs. For 150 years, Children's National Hospital has provided world-class care and groundbreaking research. Please donate today to help patients and healthcare heroes this holiday season. Visit childrensnational.org/holiday. That's childrensnational.org/holiday.
The Traveler's Inn, Tangled Skein, Episode 10, Music Soothes the Savage Beast. Bippity, boppity, boo! Mogget screamed, landing upright and thrusting his hands out before him. Manx turned at the sound and saw the mage drop to the ground, fire erupting in a stream in front of the wizard. Spiders burst into flame, curling and crackling as the moisture inside them turned to steam. "That's unexpected," the young man smiled. "But hell yeah. Let's kill these bastards." The last words were uncharacteristically loud and shouted to the group of flagging miscreants that followed the thief into the battle. The fight raged, most of the larger attackers laying upside down in heaps, legs tucked into their abdomens. The smaller attackers were scattered, running for the cover of buildings and sheds. Looking towards the edge of light surrounding the town, Manx could taste victory. That was when dozens of spiders, each the size of a guard dog, skittered over the top, under, or around the smoldering defenses of the village. "Jinsu! Jinsu!" yelled the mage, throwing blades that glinted bright in the torchlight. Wave after wave of spiders appeared, hard-shelled. The monsters spat globs of webs from abdomens tucked under their bodies, raising themselves as high as they could go on spindly legs to shoot underneath. Villagers stomped in their tracks as the viscous globs cemented them to the hard-packed earth. A second wave leaped over the first, landing on people's shoulders and stabbing down with pincers. The smaller ones that had been running for cover reversed their path and returned to the fight. The mass of mini marauders blanketed the citizens, dozens of bites thrusting toxin into terrified townsfolk. Manx watched his people. "What? They, all of a sudden, are my people? Do I really feel some responsibility for these villagers?" And his body locked up. Every muscle tightened, and he refused to be beaten. His mind spun as he tried to find some way to overcome this horror. He wanted to escape into his music. That idea tickled at his awareness, hinting at something more, something hidden behind the curtain folds of his awareness. "My music!" he gasped. The thief dug into the pouch on his hip, gaping at the rushing horde of monsters. He pulled out his small gramophone, the creatures only a few meters away, turning the dial and staring with wide-eyed horror at the tide of death rushing towards him. He found the one song that he so desperately wanted to hear at that moment. Cranking the handle of the music box, a tinny tune wailed. The Spider Queen's voice rose over the battlefield. The humans turned to look at him, freezing in place as the hypnotic song grew. They were stunned and immobilized, stuck in place, just as he had been back in the tower. That reaction guaranteed their death. Gunther's sword dropped from his loose fingers, falling to the ground beside him. The big man swayed gently, his head tilted to one side, watching Manx crank out the tune. The priestess was in her throng of women, and they stood facing the thief, heads lifted to the night sky as if listening to something from far away call to them on the wind. But Manx wasn't frozen in place. He could feel the movement of the music deep inside him. It was as if a spiderweb of melody was spreading outward from him and across the village and surrounding woods. He could sense each creature in the web, humans struggling against their unseen bonds, and spiders running along the threads as easily as a man runs down a road. He reached out, locking down the movement of the spiders. The beasts stopped in place, cutting the bonds around the people of Salami. He freed them from the call of the siren's song. They jerked back to awareness. The fibers vibrated inside the young man, and he followed them deeper, seeking the middle. Something dark pulsed at the epicenter of Manx's awareness, and an answering song echoed from the dark pit within him. It felt ancient and knowledgeable, but not on an intellectual level, rather more on an instinctual level. The onyx world within the thief expanded, and his awareness sought a point of reference to help him get his bearings. His mind struggled, searching for something to latch onto. A pinpoint of light appeared in the distance. His awareness rushed towards the cold, white dot, drawing near to it. The object shimmered, wavered, and then exploded in a shower of sparks on a horizontal plane. An arc of thousands of white-hot dots moved up and away from the source explosion, becoming small suns that shot into the endless black. The stars expanded across the cosmos, filling the void of creation. In the middle of all that energy and worlds spinning away like they were trying to escape some predator, a light winked out. Then another, and another. Dozens of suns disappeared, drawn into something that was very hungry. A sound vibrated along the silken cord that led to the origin of the dark. It started as a whisper, then became a baritone thrum, though it held no masculinity or femininity. Come to me. The command didn't come from a voice, but an impulse. Bring me nourishment. Feed me. Manx jerked away, repulsed by the intensity of the demand. He felt himself sliding towards the being in the center of the web, drawn in. It felt reluctant, torn between taking him or using him as a tool to bring in more, so much more. He slammed back into his own awareness, his own body, his hand still turning the crank on his music box. He watched his fingers shaking on the tiny, bent arm of the machine, amplified the tinny song coming from the device so much more than it had been before he'd gone inside to that place. He looked across the killing field, his gorge rising as he thought about the slaughter in front of him and what was to come. The villagers were running through the invaders, bashing and slashing at the immobile attackers turned victims. Spiders collapsed, hacked in half, or crushed by barrels, staves, rakes, and wagons by terrified and desperate people. Anything the people of Salami could get their hands on went into the effort of crushing the alien invaders. Gunther's battle cry ripped through the night, cut by Luna's war shout. The two fought side by side, dancing the elegant steps of death that came with the experience of war and killing. It wasn't a brutal process, but more of a tedious and monotonous march towards an inevitable goal. Maggots leaped in front of an older couple who were on fire duty, making sure the flames and explosions never reached the buildings. hewing down a spider with blade and flame. The mage bounced forward 3 small leaps covering a dozen meters. Landing beside a group of urchins, he flipped an enemy upside down and gutted the beast. Scanning the field of carnage, Manx saw that most of the attackers were dead, on fire, or being eviscerated at that moment. The call of the thing from beyond tickled at his thoughts, urging him to. He tore his hand from the box, threw the device to the ground, and crushed it under his heel. The brass and wood box bent, then shattered under his foot. Manx's head spun, and he wobbled on his feet, a wave of nausea rolling through him. He bent double and hurled. He continued to heave and choke long after dispelling the contents of his belly. "You okay, Moist?" a deep voice asked, and the young man felt a huge hand on his shoulder. Manx? Looking up, the thief saw Luna and Gunther standing over him. Moggets a few meters behind the two. "Yeah," Manx sighed. "Fine. So stop touching me. Remember the no touching rule." Gunther jerked his hand back. "Moggets," Manx croaked, waving the mage forward. "Help me stand." The wizard moved forward, taking a wide path around Luna, who glared at him. Moggets slid an arm under Manx's, helping the younger man stand. The thief was pale and teetered on his feet. "I saw you." Manx turned his head and spat some of the remaining vomit onto the ground. "Saving people. Pretty selfless for such a me-centric sort of guy." "Yeah, well," Moggets hesitated. "They'll pay a bit extra, even if it's just in beer and bread, for me doing that. Maybe even sing about me in some story. Right, Gunther?" "Sure, mage." The barbarian clapped the smaller man on the shoulder, causing both the wizard and thief to stumble. "How'd you get back? Luna said that you were dead." "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. Not that certain parties didn't give it their best shot to make that happen." Mogget smiled at the priestess. "You're not going to tell?" Luna trailed off, torn between anger and something else. Clenching her fist, she shifted her feet and looked away from the 3 men. "It's simple." Maggots looked at Gunther and Manx. "Luna had to go because I had to run the magical thing. The big, bad box boy was rising from the flaming ashes of the tower, and I had to defend her as she ran away." "I didn't run away!" Luna's voice rose to a shout. "She's right. My apologies. I misspoke." Moggets gave a little bow of his head to the priestess. "She flew away under my power and because of my sacrifice." The woman glowered at the mage, but Manx's coughing cut the tension. "I need to lie down," the thief said. "I have to warn you. Something's coming. Something big. And it's very, very dangerous." "I know, kid." Moggets patted Manx's hand, walking forward. "But it's not coming here, and it's not coming tonight. So let's get some rest and make plans to get back to the inn where we can claim our rewards, here and there." "Yes!" Gunther raised his voice to a triumphant shout, one hand patting the preening dragon on his shoulder. "We came, we saw, we stabbed many things. Now it's time for wine, women, and song." "Speaking of rewards," Moggets looked at Luna. "Thanks for bringing my bag of stuff with you to keep safe. I'll be taking that back once we're inside." The rain beat down on the 4 travelers as they trudged up the muddy, rutted road. A steaming pile of horse manure in the gutter melted in the night storm as they approached the travelers' inn. The weathered sign, an oval that was narrower at the sides, cut into a stylized shape that spoke of taverns, pubs, and inns for a long time past, creaked on 3 metal links as it swung in the constant breeze of the waning storm. Gunther's boots clumped on the warped boards of the porch. Moving further in, he looked over his shoulder as he pulled off his cloak to shake it out. Water droplets flew in all directions, earning him a glare from Luna as she mounted the 2 steps. Mogget slid around the woman, moving further down the porch where he could have more room to take off his own outerwear. He hunched under the weight of his burden, the pack full of books. He'd had to share some of the things he'd acquired, assuring everyone that he planned to do that all along. Dropping his bag to a rocking chair, the thin man arched backwards, his fists planted firmly in the small of his back. Wincing, he groaned. A series of snapping pops came from behind him, and he sighed in relief. "Where's Moist?" Gunther asked. "It's Manx," came a sigh from behind the barbarian. The big man jumped, spinning in the air, and came down with a hand on the pommel of the sword at his waist. "Don't do that!" Gunther followed the admonishment with a few choice swear words. "Stop calling me an adjective, and I will stop appearing directly behind you where it would be so easy to find tender organs without you ever seeing the blade coming towards you." Manx smiled at the warrior. "He's just so damned innocent," Luna said, reaching for the handle of the door. "I mean, he's oily and sneaky, but that face has cheeks meant to be pinched. At least, it does when he smiles." "Hey, lady," Manx held up a finger. "Remember the no-touching rule?" "You let that filthy, lying, conniving wizard touch you?" Luna shot a dark look at Mogget. "Yeah," the mage agreed, "but only after dark when the lights are out." The thief snickered and the priestess sighed. Pushing the release on the door, Luna swung it open. Looking around the warrior woman, Mogget noted that the interior of the establishment looked slightly different from their last visit a few days ago. Was it the color of the sawdust? A new mirror behind the bar? Or did the stairs always turn at the corner of the ceiling? He couldn't put his finger on what it was, but something was definitely not kosher in Dodge. A hush had fallen over the room as every head turned to look at the door, and the tinkle of the bell overhead cut through that lack of the noise. Luna stepped inside, pulling off her cloak and shaking it over the sawdust-strewn floor, and reached to put it on a hook. Manx pushed past her, shoving the cloak out of his way. "Moy's always like this," the thief muttered. "She always blocks the door. Have some consideration for others. I mean, we've been walking in the rain for hours, and we all want to get inside and get dry." "Because she likes the attention," the maid said loudly as he slid in on the other side of the warrior priestess. "Likes people to look at her and check out her—" Mogget fell quiet, chuckling to himself as Luna stared him down. The 3 had entered, each hanging their cloaks in various places, leaving Gunther standing in the doorway. Blueberry ventured a look from behind the big man's calf, a look that spoke of an apprehensive child reluctant to return home. The big man draped his cloak over his arm and gazed round the common room. He had a wistful smile on his face and looked relieved. Shifting the sword from his waist to his back, the barbarian then leaned down and unlaced his chaps. He only wore them in wet weather to stop chafing. He also had a fur set for colder weather. Mogget watched the warrior, the rain spattering and splashing in the puddles behind his bulked-out body. Gunther looked contemplative and content. That was odd, at least for the barbarian. Draping the chaps across the top of the wet cloak, the man entered the traveler's inn. He didn't shout, didn't bellow for service, or demand anything. He simply trailed after Luna and Manx as they meandered through the tables to one that was available. It was the one in front of the fireplace, and Mogget saw Gunther smile, just a little bit. But he saw it. Luna fell into a chair at the head of the table, her back to the fireplace. Manx slid into the one to her left, his eyes shifting around the room. Gunther settled into the one across from the thief, reaching to the center of the table to distribute the flatware and cloth napkins. Moggitz flipped a chair backwards, dropping onto it and crossing his arms along the back and setting his chin on his wrist. A woman came over and Luna ordered for the group. Wine, mead, and ale, in addition to lamb, rye bread, vein cheese, and a vegetable stew, would arrive shortly. The mage looked around the inn, taking in the locals. At a second glance, none of the people here looked all that local. A gnome sat on a bar stool, glaring at the barbarian. No, not Gunther, but Blueberry, who was curled up in the crook of the warrior's neck, nuzzling against him as the big man idly stroked her wing. An ogre stood behind the gnome. No, not a full-bred ogre. It had some other blood in it. It wasn't large enough for a full breed, patting the tiny man's back sympathetically. A man in a swashbuckler's blouse lounged in a corner booth, one leg on the table in front of him, staring directly at the mage. He idly cleaned his fingernails with a stiletto, and a bushy-haired, rotund halfling stood on the bench beside him, animatedly gesturing as he told some tale. Demon half-breed? Moggitz thought, which was followed by a surprised realization. How did I know he has some demon blood in him? The glass-domed automaton that had been there before tended the bar. The thick golem with the broom leaned towards Cogsley, the whisper about the floors loud enough to be heard across the room. Other patrons, like the old man and woman with the metal arm at the bar, stood out, but also blended in. The wizard wondered why he hadn't noticed their oddities on his previous visit. The place had changed, and Moggitz picked it out now that he could study the room. It was hard to focus on, though. Like the features kept slipping away from his awareness. 4 other doors were on the exterior walls as well. Well, that's different, Moggitz gasped, almost to himself. What is? Manx asked. Doors, the mage said without thinking, then clamped his lips tight. Yeah, Manx sighed. I noticed 2 in the corners. You see them also? Only 1 in the corner, but 1 on each of the main walls. Moggitz studied the kid. The street thief wasn't really a kid, far from it. If he would only shave off the sad wisps of a beard, maybe leave the mustache, but shape it with wax, and wash and cut his hair, he'd look like a man rather than a sulky youth. But the kid's eyes were sharp, and now slightly more haunted than they'd been when they'd left the establishment. A cloth sack shinked onto the center of the table, the sound of moving coins pulling Moggitz's attention from Manx to the reward dropped by Jack. All 4 of them jerked in surprise as a man appeared beside the table, Luna cutting off in mid-sentence as she explained the tenets of respect to Gunther. Here's the designated payoff for your adventure, Jack said, smiling, and I see no one needs limbs grown back or revived from a dead or undead state. That's great. You folks did okay. There was a chorus of thanks from the table, and Jack stepped to one side as the serving woman arrived with the food. The group made appreciative noises as the trays, plates, pitchers, and trenchers were set on the table. The woman departed and Jack centered himself again. Will you be staying long? Jack asked. I need to be getting on in the morning, Luna said, pouring mead into her goblet, but I'll need a room for the night. Jack nodded and looked at the barbarian. I need to get back to my people, Gunther smiled. I think it would do me good. I'm sticking around, Manx said, not looking up as he ladled stew into his bowl. This place looks interesting, especially those new doors. Jack raised his eyebrows, a smile teasing the sides of his mouth. I might just hang out for a while, too, Moggitz said. just to see what pops up.
This holiday season, we all wish for hope and healing. Children and families who spend their holidays at the hospital deserve a reason to believe in first steps, in giggles, high fives, and hugs. For 150 years, Children's National Hospital has provided world-class care and groundbreaking research. Please donate today to help patients and healthcare heroes this holiday season. Visit childrensnational.org/holiday. That's childrensnational.org/holiday.